The moment Marcus Reynolds stepped through his front door that December afternoon, he knew something had changed. The house, which had been wrapped in silence for what felt like an eternity, was suddenly alive with sound. Music drifted through the hallway, something classical, gentle, flowing like water over stones. He stood frozen in the entryway, his leather briefcase heavy in his hand, his heart beginning to race with a mixture of hope and fear he hadn't felt in years. For 3 long years, his sprawling home in the suburbs of Denver had been a mausoleum. The kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, that made you hyper-aware of your own breathing, your own footsteps echoing too loud against hardwood floors. His twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, both diagnosed with severe autism at age 2, had stopped making sounds altogether after the accident. No words, no laughter, no humming, no crying. Just silence, thick and suffocating, filling every corner of what used to be a home full of life. Marcus had begun to believe that silence was his new reality, that this was simply what his life would be now, managing a household where communication happened through clinical reports and specialist appointments, where connection was measured in data points and behavioral charts rather than conversation and joy. But now, standing in his own entryway, he heard something that made his breath catch in his throat. Laughter. High-pitched, genuine, the kind of children's laughter that sounds like bells. His daughter's laughter, something he hadn't heard since the morning his wife, Sarah, had kissed them goodbye before getting in her car for the last time. Marcus set his briefcase down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. His hands were trembling as he moved through the hallway toward the living room, following the sound of that impossible music, that miraculous laughter. His mind raced through possibilities, explanations, but nothing prepared him for what he saw when he reached the doorway. The living room had been transformed, the furniture pushed back to create an open space in the center. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars, and in the center of it all, 3 figures moved in perfect harmony. Jennifer Martinez stood with her arms raised gracefully above her head, her movements fluid and purposeful like a dancer telling a story without words. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a soft gray sweater, but the way she moved made her look like she belonged on a stage. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful and concentrated, completely present in the moment. And on either side of her, wearing matching lavender tutus over their leggings, were Emma and Sophie, his daughters. His beautiful, silent, unreachable daughters. They were dancing. Not just moving, dancing. Their small arms reached toward the ceiling, mirroring Jennifer's movements with careful attention. Their faces, usually so blank and distant, were radiant with pure, unfiltered joy. They were completely engaged, fully present, more alive than Marcus had seen them in 3 devastating years. Sophie's eyes were focused intently on Jennifer, tracking every movement with precision. Emma's mouth was curved in a real smile, not the vacant expression that had haunted Marcus's dreams. They were here, really here, not lost in whatever internal world they'd retreated to after Sarah died. They were present, participating, connecting. The briefcase slipped from Marcus's fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. 3 heads turned toward him in unison. For a moment, nobody moved. Marcus felt like he was watching through glass, afraid that if he breathed too hard, the scene would dissolve and he'd find himself back in the familiar nightmare of silence and distance. Then Emma did something that made Marcus's knees buckle. She looked directly at him, real eye contact, something she hadn't done in 3 years, and held his gaze. Her brown eyes, so much like Sarah's, locked onto his. And then, slowly, deliberately, she extended one small hand toward him, not away, not in dismissal or fear, toward him, inviting him in. Marcus dropped to his knees right there in the doorway, his vision blurring with tears he'd held back for so long they felt like they might drown him. His throat closed up, making it impossible to speak. All he could do was reach back toward his daughter with a trembling hand. For the first time in 3 years, when Marcus reached for his daughters, they didn't pull away. They didn't flinch or turn their backs or disappear into themselves. Sophie moved toward him first, her steps tentative but purposeful. Then Emma followed, still holding that impossible eye contact. They placed their small hands in his, and Marcus felt something inside his chest crack open, not breaking but opening. Like a door that had been sealed shut, finally letting in light and he pulled them close and they let him. They pressed against him, warm and real and present, and Marcus wept into their hair while Jennifer stood a few feet away, her own eyes glistening with tears. When the music finally faded into silence, Marcus looked up at this woman, Jennifer Martinez, the housekeeper he'd hired 6 weeks ago and barely noticed beyond her efficiency and her quiet demeanor. She knelt down beside them now, her hand gentle on Sophie's back. "How," Marcus whispered, his voice raw and broken, "how did you do this?" Jennifer's smile was sad and knowing. They were never unreachable, Mr. Reynolds. They were just communicating in a different language. They needed someone willing to learn it instead of forcing them to speak ours. Marcus stared at her, his mind reeling. 15 specialists over 3 years, 15 highly credentialed professionals with impressive degrees and clinical experience. He'd paid them over $2 million combined behavioral therapists, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, developmental specialists. They'd filled notebooks with observations, created elaborate treatment plans, tracked data points and developmental milestones. They'd used every evidence-based approach in the field. And not one of them had reached his daughters the way this woman, a housekeeper he was paying minimum wage to clean his floors and prepare meals, had done in 6 weeks. How was that possible? What did she know that they didn't? What had he been missing all along? Marcus looked from Jennifer to his daughters, still nestled against him, still present and warm and here. Emma's hand rested on his chest, right over his heart. Sophie's head was tucked under his chin. They were home, really home, for the first time since Sarah died. And in that moment, Marcus made a decision. He needed to understand what had just happened. He needed to know who Jennifer Martinez really was, because something told him there was a story here, something she hadn't shared when he'd hired her through the domestic staffing agency, something important. What Marcus didn't know yet was that Jennifer had her own grief, her own ghosts, her own reasons for taking a job that was so far beneath her qualifications. He didn't know that God had been orchestrating this meeting long before Marcus ever posted that job listing. He didn't know that the miracle he'd just witnessed was only the beginning of a much bigger transformation, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about healing, about love, about what it meant to be a family. Marcus didn't say anything about what he'd witnessed that afternoon. He couldn't find the words, couldn't figure out how to articulate something that felt too precious, too fragile to examine too closely. So instead, he just started coming home earlier. At first, it was just an hour. He'd wrap up his meetings by 4 instead of 5, tell his assistant he needed to review contracts from home. Then it became 2 hours. By the end of the first week, Marcus was leaving his downtown Denver office by noon, making up excuses that became increasingly flimsy. His executive assistant, Patricia, who'd worked with him for 12 years, stopped questioning after the third day. She just started blocking his afternoons automatically, marking them as personal appointments without asking for explanations. Marcus would slip into his house as quietly as possible, careful not to let the door click too loudly, not to let his footsteps on the hardwood announce his presence. He'd set his briefcase down in the entryway, loosen his tie, and then move through his own home like a ghost, watching from doorways and corners, observing something he couldn't quite believe was real. What he saw in those hidden hours broke him open in ways he didn't know were possible. It was like watching a master class in connection, in presence, in understanding another human being so completely that words became optional. Jennifer wasn't doing therapy in any clinical sense. There were no flashcards, no structured drills, no systematic desensitization protocols. She was just living, moving through the house doing ordinary tasks, but doing them in a way that created an almost musical rhythm that his daughters couldn't help but notice. One afternoon, Marcus watched from the kitchen doorway as Jennifer folded laundry in the living room. She wasn't just folding, she was moving to some internal rhythm, swaying gently as she worked, humming a melody that sounded familiar but that Marcus couldn't quite place. Her body had a natural grace to it, an economy of movement that was mesmerizing to watch. And Sophie, who usually spent hours rocking in the corner, had stopped. She was sitting absolutely still, her eyes locked on Jennifer with intense focus. She wasn't watching in the vacant, unfocused way she usually looked at things. She was actively observing, studying, learning. When Jennifer picked up a towel and folded it corner to core, smooth it out, fold again, Sophie's hands moved in her lap, mimicking the pattern. Not touching anything, just moving through the motions in the air like she was learning choreography. Learning a dance of domestic life that somehow made sense to her in ways that verbal instructions never had. Marcus's throat tightened watching it. How many times had he tried to teach his daughters simple tasks? How many occupational therapists had attempted to build these basic life skills? They'd used visual schedules, hand-over-hand prompting, reward systems, behavioral chains. Nothing had worked. The girls would either shut down completely or escalate into meltdowns that could last for hours. But here was Sophie, learning to fold laundry by watching Jennifer move, by absorbing the rhythm and pattern of it. Not because she was being taught, but because the way Jennifer moved made it make sense. Another day, Marcus observed from the top of the stairs as Jennifer set the table for lunch. Most people approach setting a table as a purely functional task, put the plates down, add the silverware, move on to the next thing, but Jennifer did it differently. She placed each item with deliberate rhythm: plate, pause, fork, pause, cup, pause, napkin. Each placement became a beat in a pattern, a note in a song. And across the room, Emma stood at the window, her hands moving in the same pattern against the glass. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, pause. She was mapping the rhythm, internalizing it, making it part of her own physical vocabulary. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. This was what Sarah had done. This was exactly how Sarah had moved through the world, with grace and rhythm and an understanding that their daughters experienced reality differently than neurotypical children. Sarah had never tried to force the girls into a mold. She just met them where they were, spoke their language, invited them to participate in life on their own terms. And then she died, and Marcus had been so devastated, so completely shattered that he'd forgotten. He'd forgotten how Sarah danced while she cooked dinner, how she'd bounce the girls on her hip while she worked, how she'd turn mundane tasks into rhythmic play. He'd forgotten that before the autism specialists and the behavioral interventions, Sarah had been reaching their daughters just fine with nothing but love and presence and movement. Jennifer was doing exactly what Sarah would have done. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. One Thursday afternoon, something happened that made Marcus forget how to breathe. He was watching from his office, door cracked just enough to see into the living room. Jennifer stood in the center of the space and slowly raised her arms, palms facing up like she was lifting something invisible but precious. She did it once, lowered her arms, waited, then did it again, then a third time. And Sophie, who hadn't imitated anyone or anything in 3 years, who existed in her own world with her own patterns that no one else could reach, raised her arms too. Slowly, carefully, deliberately, mirroring Jennifer's movement with focused intention. Marcus's hand froze on his laptop trackpad. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. This was called modeling imitation, a fundamental building block of learning that his daughters had lost access to after the trauma of losing Sarah. The behavioral therapist had tried for months to rebuild this skill using structured programs. They'd failed completely. And here was Sophie doing it naturally because Jennifer had created a relationship where imitation felt safe, felt meaningful, felt like connection instead of compliance. Marcus wanted to shout. He wanted to run into that room and pull Jennifer into a hug and thank her for giving him back something he thought was gone forever. He wanted to call everyone he knew and tell them about this miracle he was witnessing. He wanted to cry and laugh and fall apart and pull himself together all at once. But he didn't move. He just sat there, watching through the crack in the door as this woman he barely knew unlocked his daughters with nothing but patience and presence, and some kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught in any graduate program. That's when the question began to haunt him: how did she know? How did a housekeeper from a domestic staffing agency understand autism and nonverbal communication and the power of movement therapy better than 15 specialists with advanced degrees? How did she know exactly what his daughters needed when certified professionals had been baffled? Marcus started watching Jennifer as closely as he watched his daughters. He noticed things he'd missed before. The way she moved wasn't just graceful, it was trained. Her posture, her balance, her control over every gesture suggested years of discipline and practice. When she reached for something on a high shelf, her arm extended in a perfect arc. When she bent to pick something up, her spine stayed aligned, her movement controlled and intentional. This wasn't just natural grace, this was professional training. And the way she observed Emma and Sophie, that wasn't casual attention. Jennifer watched his daughters with clinical precision, noting their patterns, their triggers, their communication attempts. She'd adjust her approach based on tiny shifts in their body language that Marcus wouldn't have noticed. She was reading them, constantly assessing and adapting the way a skilled therapist would. But she was doing it while washing dishes and vacuuming carpets and preparing meals, as if all of this was just part of her job description. Who was Jennifer Martinez? What was her real story? And why was someone with her obvious expertise working as a housekeeper for minimum wage? Marcus needed to know, not just out of curiosity, but because his daughter's future depended on it. If Jennifer left, if she got a better job somewhere else, if she decided domestic work wasn't for her, what would happen to Emma and Sophie? Would they slip back into the silence they'd just escaped? Would they lose the connection they'd just found? The thought terrified him more than anything had in 3 years. That evening, after the girls were asleep and Jennifer was finishing up in the kitchen, Marcus made a decision. He was going to ask her. He was going to find out who she really was, what she was hiding, and why the best thing that had ever happened to his family had walked into his life disguised as domestic help. Because Marcus had spent 3 years learning that credentials and degrees didn't guarantee results, and now he'd spent 6 weeks learning that sometimes the right person shows up in the most unexpected form. He just needed to understand why, and he needed to figure out how to make sure she never left. That evening, Marcus found Jennifer in the kitchen doing the final cleanup of the day. The soft glow of the pendant lights cast warm shadows across the granite countertops. She was wiping down the sink with the same deliberate attention she brought to everything else, methodical, thorough, present. Jennifer, his voice came out rougher than intended, thick with emotion he was still trying to process. She looked up, and for just a moment, Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty maybe, or fear, like she'd been expecting this conversation and dreading it. "Could you stay for a few minutes, please?" He gestured toward the small breakfast nook by the window. "I'd like to talk with you." In 3 years of employing various staff, housekeepers, nannies, respite care workers, Marcus had never done this. never invited anyone to sit down for a real conversation beyond logistics and schedules. His interactions with employees had been cordial but distant, professional in the coldest sense. He gave instructions, they followed them, money exchanged hands. Simple, transactional, safe. But nothing about Jennifer felt simple anymore. Of course, Mr. Reynolds. She set down the dishcloth and dried her hands carefully before following him to the table. They sat across from each other in the dimly lit kitchen, and for a long moment, Marcus didn't know how to begin. How do you ask someone to explain something that feels like magic? How do you question a miracle without seeming ungrateful? Where did you learn it? He finally asked, his hands clasped tightly on the table in front of him. What you do with Emma and Sophie, the way you move, the way you reach them, where did that come from? Jennifer's face went very still. She looked down at her own hands, folded neatly in her lap. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. I don't mean to overstep by asking, Marcus continued quickly, the words tumbling out. I need to understand. 15 specialists over 3 years, Jennifer, 15, some of the best in Denver in the entire region. I paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they couldn't do what you've done in 6 weeks. Mr. Reynolds. Marcus, he interrupted, please, just Marcus. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and Marcus saw something in her dark eyes that he hadn't noticed before. Pain, deep old pain that had carved permanent grooves around her mouth and left shadows beneath her eyes, the kind of pain that matched his own. I wasn't always a housekeeper, she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. I worked as a dance and movement therapist for 5 years, Jennifer continued, her voice steady but soft. Specialized in children with developmental differences, primarily autism spectrum disorders. I focused on nonverbal communication, using movement and rhythm as bridges to connection when words weren't accessible. Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. You're a trained therapist. Was, she corrected firmly. I was a therapist, I gave up my license 2 years ago, I'm not practicing anymore, I'm not qualified to. You saw it immediately, didn't you? Marcus interrupted. From the first day, you knew what Emma and Sophie needed. Jennifer nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. I saw it within the first hour, the way they moved, the patterns they created, how they'd retreat into themselves when the environment became overwhelming. I recognized all of it. I knew that traditional verbal approaches would keep failing them, that they needed movement-based connection, that their autism wasn't a barrier to communication, it just required a different language. Then why didn't you say anything? Marcus heard the edge in his own voice and couldn't suppress it. Why did you let me keep trying the same things that weren't working? Why didn't you tell me you could help them? Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Because who would believe the housekeeper? I'm paid $8 an hour to clean toilets and do laundry. Why would anyone listen to me when you had all these specialists with their credentials and their clinical experience? I thought, her voice cracked. I thought if I could just help them quietly without making it official, without drawing attention to what I was doing, maybe I could make a difference without risking everything. Risking what? Risking you firing me, she said bluntly. Risking you thinking I was overstepping, being inappropriate, playing therapist when I had no business doing so. Risking you calling my agency and getting me blacklisted. I needed this job, Marcus, and I couldn't bear the thought of being removed from their lives once I'd started connecting with them. The raw honesty in her voice made Marcus's chest ache. He thought about the dynamic he'd created in his own home, the hierarchy where Jennifer's insights were worth less than a specialist's because of her job title, the way he'd been so buried in his own grief and desperation that he'd never even asked her about her background, her skills, her story. Tell me about the 5 years, Marcus said more gently. Tell me about before you became a housekeeper. Jennifer took a shaky breath. I was good at it, really good. I worked with dozens of children, helped families find ways to connect with kids who everyone else had written off as unreachable. I loved the work more than anything I'd ever done. It felt like a calling, like I'd been put on this earth specifically to help these children find their voices, even if those voices didn't use words. So what happened? Why did you stop? The question seemed to hurt her physically. Jennifer closed her eyes and a tear slid down her cheek. Burnout, complete devastating burnout. I took every case personally. Every child I couldn't help felt like a failure, like I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't skilled enough, wasn't enough. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. I'd lie awake at night replaying sessions, wondering what I'd missed, what I could have done differently. Marcus recognized that kind of pain. He'd felt it himself over the past 3 years, the guilt, the sense of failure, the desperate conviction that if he just tried harder, spent more money, found the right specialist, everything would be okay. There was one case in particular, Jennifer continued, her voice barely above a whisper. A 6-year-old boy named Daniel, severe autism, nonverbal, incredibly withdrawn. I worked with him for 8 months, tried everything I knew, nothing reached him. His parents were getting desperate, talking about institutional placement. I promised them I could help, that I just needed more time. She paused, struggling with the memory. One day, Daniel's father brought him to a session, and I could tell immediately something was different. Daniel was more agitated than usual, hitting himself, biting his hands. I thought it was just a bad day. I tried to work with him anyway, tried to push through. And he had a complete meltdown, hurt himself badly enough that they had to take him to the emergency room. Jennifer. I should have recognized the signs, she said, the words tumbling out now like she'd been holding them back for too long. I should have known he wasn't in a space where he could engage safely, but I was so desperate to prove I could help him to not fail another child that I ignored my own training. After that, Daniel's parents pulled him from therapy with me. They had every right to, and I fell apart completely. I couldn't work anymore, couldn't trust my own judgment. I was terrified I'd hurt another child by pushing too hard. So you walked away, Marcus said softly. I gave up my license and spent the next 2 years taking domestic jobs, cleaning houses, cooking meals, staying invisible. I told myself I was healing, that I was stepping away from the pressure. But really, I was hiding, running from the weight of all those expectations and all that potential to do harm. Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to process everything she'd just told him. This woman who'd been scrubbing his floors and doing his laundry was a trained specialist who'd walked away from her calling because she cared too much. And in trying to hide from her own expertise, she'd stumbled directly into the situation she was uniquely qualified to handle. You've been treating my daughters, Marcus said slowly, this whole time, not officially but effectively. I couldn't help it, Jennifer admitted. When I saw Emma and Sophie, saw how they moved, how they communicated through gesture and rhythm, I recognized them. I recognized myself in their parents' eyes, all that desperation and grief. And I thought maybe this time, just this once, I could help, quietly, without the pressure of professional expectations, without the risk of spectacular failure. Marcus felt a complex tangle of emotions. Gratitude that she'd cared enough to help, anger that she'd felt she had to hide her expertise, shame that he'd created an environment where she couldn't be honest about who she was. I've been paying you minimum wage, he said, his voice thick with emotion. $8 an hour to clean my house when all this time you've been doing what I paid specialists 6 figures to fail at. I didn't do it for money, Jennifer said quickly. I did it because I needed to know I could still help someone, that I wasn't broken, that maybe I did have something valuable to offer after all. Marcus looked at this remarkable woman sitting across from him, this person who'd given him back his daughters while thinking she had to hide her greatest gift because no one would value it from someone in a housekeeper's uniform. The injustice of it made him furious, not at her, but at himself, at the systems and hierarchies and prejudices that made someone like Jennifer feel invisible. Teach me, Marcus said suddenly, leaning forward. Teach me how to do what you do, how to be present with them the way you are, how to speak their language. Jennifer looked at him with surprise. Marcus, it's not about technique. It's not a program you can implement or a curriculum you can follow. It's about showing up, being patient, meeting them in their world instead of forcing them into ours. It's about letting go of your expectations and agenda and just being with them, really with them. Then teach me that, he said firmly. Because I've been absent for 3 years, Jennifer. I've been hiding at my office, going through the motions at home, keeping everything at arm's length because it hurt too much to be fully present. And you've shown me that my daughters have been here all along, waiting for someone to meet them where they are. I want to be that person. I need to be that person. Something shifted in Jennifer's expression. For the first time since the conversation began, she smiled, a small, sad smile but real. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'll help you, but Marcus, you need to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to unlearn a lot of the approaches you've been taught. You're going to have to sit with discomfort, with uncertainty. You're going to have to trust the process even when it doesn't look like anything is happening. I can do that, Marcus said. I have to do that. Jennifer nodded slowly, but there was something else in her eyes now, something uncertain, almost frightened. And Marcus realized that by inviting her to step fully into her role, by asking her to claim her expertise, he was asking her to face the very thing that had broken her 2 years ago. He was asking her to risk failing again, to risk caring too much, to risk the devastating weight of responsibility for vulnerable children's well-being. And neither of them knew yet what that would cost her, or what would happen when the professional world that had never valued her work as a housekeeper started paying attention to the miracles happening in the Reynolds home. A week after their kitchen conversation, something happened that would change the trajectory of everything. Marcus had been putting it off for 3 years, but he finally gave Jennifer the key to Sarah's studio, a converted bedroom on the second floor where his wife had practiced her dance, stored her teaching materials, and kept her most personal belongings. Just do what you need to do, Marcus had told Jennifer that morning, his voice barely steady as he pressed the small brass key into her palm. Go through everything, keep what might be useful for the girls, donate what makes sense. I still can't go in there. Jennifer had nodded, understanding in her eyes. She knew about rooms that held too much grief to enter. She had a few of her own. That afternoon, while the girls napped, Jennifer unlocked Sarah's studio for the first time in 3 years. The air inside was stale, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that cut through the closed curtains. Everything was exactly as Sarah had left it the morning she died. Ballet shoes on the shelf, leotards hanging in the closet, stacks of teaching notebooks on the desk, photographs covering one entire wall. Jennifer moved through the space carefully, reverently, touching everything like it was sacred. Because it was. This room held the essence of a woman who understood what Jennifer understood. That movement was language, that dance was connection, that some souls needed rhythm and grace to find their way into the world. She worked methodically, sorting through Sarah's teaching materials first. Lesson plans for the children's dance classes Sarah had taught, notes about individual students, their challenges, their breakthroughs. Sarah's handwriting was beautiful, flowing, and artistic, matching the grace with which she'd apparently moved through life. Then Jennifer opened the closet to assess what clothing might be donated. Behind Sarah's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a garment bag, she found something unexpected. A large cardboard box, unmarked except for a single word written in permanent marker, later. Jennifer pulled the box out carefully and set it on the floor. Inside were dozens of small flash drives, each one labeled in Sarah's handwriting with dates, some from when she was pregnant, others from when the twins were infants, more from when they were toddlers, learning to walk, beginning to show the early signs of autism that would later be confirmed. Jennifer's hands trembled as she read the labels. The dates created a timeline of Sarah's life as a mother, documenting something important enough that she'd saved it all in this box marked later. The last drive was dated 2 days before the accident. Jennifer sat on the floor of Sarah's studio, the box in her lap, tears already forming in her eyes. She knew somehow what these contained: a mother's legacy, a roadmap left behind for daughters who might need it, evidence that Sarah had known, had prepared, had left something behind for exactly this moment. She carried the box downstairs with shaking hands, feeling the weight of it, not physical weight, but the weight of love and loss and preparation that it represented. Marcus was in the kitchen, staring at his laptop but not really seeing it. He looked up when Jennifer entered, and his face went white when he saw what she was carrying. "I found these in her studio," Jennifer said quietly, setting the box on the table between them. "In the closet behind her wedding dress. I think you need to see what's on them." Marcus stared at his wife's handwriting on the flash drives like they might explode. His hands were shaking as he reached toward the box, then pulled back. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You can," Jennifer said gently, "but you don't have to do it alone. I'll stay if you want me to." Marcus looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Please, please stay." Jennifer sat beside him at the kitchen table. Marcus picked up the first drive, dated 6 months before the twins were born. His hands shook so badly he could barely plug it into his laptop. When he finally managed it, they both held their breath as the video player opened. The screen flickered to life, and there was Sarah, radiant and glowing, her pregnant belly prominent under a flowing dress. She sat in her studio, the same room Jennifer had just left, smiling at the camera with a mixture of joy and sadness that suggested she knew something the rest of them didn't. "My sweet girls," Sarah said, her voice warm and musical. "If you're watching this, it means Mama isn't there to tell you herself." Marcus made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and pressed his hand over his mouth. "I know that words might be hard for you," Sarah continued. "Your daddy told me that might be the case, that some babies grow up with brains that work differently, that process the world in beautiful ways that other people don't always understand. And I want you to know that's okay. That's more than okay, that's perfect." She stood up, the camera following her movement. "So I'm recording these videos, my voice, my movements, the songs I sing to you while you're still inside me, because someday, even if I can't be there in person, you'll still have me. You'll still have my voice telling you that you're loved. You'll still have my movements showing you that your way of experiencing the world is valid and beautiful." Sarah began to move, swaying gently, her arms raised in graceful arcs. She hummed a lullaby, the same one Jennifer had been using with the girls without knowing its origin. Sarah's body moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime dancing, but there was something more than technical skill in her movement. There was love, every gesture radiated it. "Movement is its own language," Sarah said as she danced. "If words don't come easily to you, that's okay. Your bodies can speak, your movements can tell stories. You can communicate through dance, through rhythm, through the spaces between the beats, and anyone who truly loves you will learn to listen." The video ended after 10 minutes. Marcus and Jennifer sat in silence, both crying quietly. Marcus opened the next video, and the next, and the next. Video after video showed Sarah preparing for a future she somehow knew she might not be part of. She demonstrated movements, sang lullabies, told stories about her own childhood, shared her dreams for her daughters. She taught them, or rather taught whoever would watch with them, how to use movement as a bridge to connection. If you're sensitive to sound, we'll dance in silence, Sarah said in one video. If you need to move in patterns, we'll make those patterns beautiful. If you need to spin, we'll spin together. I'll meet you wherever you are, my loves, always. Some videos were practical, Sarah showing techniques for helping sensory-sensitive children get dressed, for transitioning between activities, for managing overwhelming environments. Other videos were purely emotional, Sarah talking about her love for Marcus, her hopes for their family, her absolute certainty that whatever challenges came, they would face them with grace. Then Marcus opened the final file. 2 days before the accident, Sarah sat in her studio, her face serious and fierce, looking directly into the camera with an intensity that made Marcus feel like she was in the room with them. Marcus, she said, and hearing his name in her voice broke something fundamental inside him. If you're watching this, something has happened to me, and I need you to hear something important. She leaned closer to the camera. Don't let the girls stop moving. Movement is their language, maybe their primary language. I know you're a man of logic and credentials and professional expertise. I know you'll want to hire the best specialists, follow the evidence-based protocols, do everything by the book. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. But here's what I need you to hear. The girls don't need to be fixed, Marcus. They need to be understood. They need to be met where they are, not dragged to where we think they should be. Find someone who understands that. Find someone who speaks their language. She wiped her eyes. And Marcus, don't let grief freeze you. Don't let fear keep you from being present. I know losing me will hurt, God. I hate that I might put you through that pain, but you have to stay present for our girls. They need you. Not your money, not your ability to hire help. They need you. Your presence, your patience, your willingness to enter their world instead of forcing them into yours. Sarah smiled through her tears. I believe in you, my love. I believe you'll find your way back to them even if you lose your way for a while. And I believe that when you're ready, when you've done your grieving, you'll find someone to help you. God will send the right person at the right time. Trust that, trust her, trust yourself. The video ended, the screen went black, and Marcus completely fell apart. He dropped his head onto his crossed arms on the table and sobbed, raw, wrenching sobs from a place he'd kept locked away for 3 years. His whole body shook with the force of it. 3 years of grief, 3 years of guilt, 3 years of desperate loneliness and fear and anger at a universe that had taken away the only person who knew how to help his daughters. Jennifer didn't say anything. She didn't offer platitudes or try to fix it. She just placed one hand gently on Marcus's shoulder and let him break. When Marcus finally looked up, his face was wet, his eyes swollen and red. He looked at Jennifer with something like wonder. She knew, he whispered hoarsely, she knew this would happen and she tried to prepare us. She loved you, Jennifer said softly. All of you, she wanted to make sure you'd be okay. And I locked it all away, Marcus gestured at the box of drives. She left me a roadmap, left the girls their mother's voice and movement, and I was so terrified of the pain that I locked it all in that room and threw away the key, for 3 years. You were grieving, Jennifer said. You did what you could to survive. Marcus shook his head. She told me not to let grief freeze me, and that's exactly what I did. I froze, I hid, I threw money at the problem and hoped someone else could fix it. He looked at Jennifer, really looked at her, seeing her clearly maybe for the first time. And then God sent you, just like Sarah said he would, someone who understands movement as language, someone who speaks my daughter's language, someone who could help me find my way back to them. Jennifer's eyes filled with fresh tears. I'm not Sarah, Marcus. I can't replace what you lost. I'm not asking you to replace her, Marcus said firmly. I'm asking you to help me honor her, help me use these videos with the girls, let them hear their mother again, let them learn from her, and Aquí, teach me how to be the father Sarah believed I could be. Jennifer nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Marcus held that final flash drive in his hands, Sarah's last message to him, and felt something shift inside his chest. For 3 years, he'd been running from this pain, terrified it would destroy him. But sitting here with Jennifer, watching Sarah prepare for a future she wouldn't see, Marcus realized something profound. The pain wasn't going to destroy him, the running from it might, but facing it, walking through it with someone who understood, that might actually save him. Tomorrow, Marcus said, his voice rough but determined. Tomorrow we start incorporating these videos into the sessions with the girls. We give them their mother back as much as we can. Jennifer squeezed his shoulder. Every day, she promised. But as Marcus carefully gathered the flash drives back into their box, neither of them knew that bringing Sarah's voice back into the house would unlock something they weren't prepared for. Something that would prove Sarah had been right about everything, including the most painful truths about love and loss and learning to live again. 2 weeks after they found Sarah's videos, something happened that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life as the moment everything changed. The moment impossible became possible. The moment silence broke open into sound. They'd been incorporating Sarah's recordings into their daily routines carefully, thoughtfully. At first, Marcus had been terrified it would devastate the girls, that hearing their mother's voice after 3 years would send them spiraling into regression, into the kind of trauma response that might undo all the progress Jennifer had facilitated. But Jennifer, drawing on her years of training and her intuitive understanding of Emma and Sophie, had known better. They remember her, she'd told Marcus. Maybe not consciously, but their bodies remember, their hearts remember. This won't break them, it might actually complete something. She'd been right. When they first played Sarah's voice, both girls had gone very still. Emma's eyes had widened. Sophie had stopped her habitual rocking. They'd listened with an intensity that suggested some part of them recognized what they were hearing, even if they couldn't articulate it. And instead of withdrawing, they'd engaged more deeply. They moved with more confidence during their sessions, smiled more readily, made more frequent eye contact. It was as if Sarah's voice gave them permission to be fully present, as if their mother was telling them it was safe to come back into the world. That particular afternoon, all three of them were in the living room: Marcus, Jennifer, and the twins. Sophie wore her favorite purple tutu. Emma had insisted on the pink one. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns on the hardwood floor. One of Sarah's lullabies played softly through the speakers, the one she'd sung most frequently when the girls were babies. Jennifer guided them through gentle movements, her arms raised gracefully, the girls mirroring her with focused attention. Marcus had started joining the sessions a week ago, no longer watching from doorways but actually participating. Not leading, he wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that, but being there, present, learning to exist in his daughter's world instead of constantly trying to pull them into his. The music swelled, Sarah's voice filling every corner of the room with warmth and love. Emma and Sophie moved in synchronized patterns, their small bodies expressing what their voices couldn't. Marcus found himself swaying too, following Jennifer's lead, letting his body remember how to move without thinking, without analyzing. And then, midway through the routine, Sophie suddenly stopped moving. Everyone froze. Marcus's heart dropped into his stomach. Was she overwhelmed? Was this too much? Had they pushed too hard, asked too much too soon? He felt the familiar panic rising, the fear that any moment of progress would be erased by pushing just slightly too far. Sophie stood completely still, staring at Jennifer with an intensity that made the air feel electric. Her small hands hung at her sides. Her face was scrunched in concentration, like she was trying to solve an incredibly complex puzzle. And then, clear as a bell, she spoke one word: again. The room went silent except for Sarah's voice still playing in the background. Marcus gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her face calm, steady, not wanting to overwhelm Sophie with an emotional reaction. Again, Jennifer said gently, her voice controlled despite the tears streaming down her face. You want to do it again, sweetheart? Sophie nodded, a deliberate, purposeful nod full of intention and communication. Then she said it again, clearer this time: again. Marcus couldn't breathe, his heart was pounding. So hard he thought it might break through his ribs. His daughter, his baby girl who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years, who specialists had warned might never develop functional language, who existed in silence so profound it had become the defining feature of their lives, she had just spoken. Not just made a sound, not just repeated something without meaning. She had communicated. She had expressed a desire, made a request, used language with intention and purpose. Jennifer raised her arms slowly, starting the movement sequence over. This time, Sophie mouthed the word silently as they moved, her lips forming the shape of it carefully, practicing. Again. When the movement ended, Sophie turned toward her father. Really turned, her whole body oriented toward him. She looked at him, direct eye contact that lasted longer than any she'd made in 3 years, and said something that shattered what was left of Marcus's heart into a million pieces. Mama singing. 2 words, full meaning, perfect connection. Marcus dropped to his knees right there on the hardwood floor, trembling violently. He wanted to scream with joy. He wanted to cry until he had no tears left. He wanted to grab his daughter and never let go. But he stayed as still as he could, terrified that any big reaction would break the spell, would send Sophie retreating back into silence. Sophie walked toward him, not shuffled, not wandered, but walked with purpose. She reached up and placed one small hand on his cheek, her touch feather-light and completely intentional. Mama singing, she said again, her voice soft but clear, we dance. That's when Marcus lost it completely. He pulled Sophie close, and for the first time in 3 years, she wrapped her arms around his neck willingly, eagerly, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Emma moved closer too, pressing herself against Marcus's side, joining the embrace without words but with complete presence. Marcus held his daughters while his entire body shook with sobs. Jennifer knelt beside them, one hand on Sophie's back, tears streaming down her own face. She spoke, Marcus whispered against Sophie's hair, his voice breaking. Jennifer, she spoke. She did, Jennifer said, smiling through her tears. She found her voice. They stayed like that for a long time, the four of them kneeling on the living room floor while Sarah's voice continued to play, like she was there with them, witnessing this impossible miracle, this moment when silence broke and language returned. That night after the girls were finally asleep, both of them exhausted from the emotional intensity of the afternoon, Marcus sat in his home office, staring at his phone. He'd recorded the moment. Sophie's voice saying again, captured forever in a 20-second video clip that he'd already watched at least 50 times. He should have been celebrating. He should have been calling everyone he knew, shouting from the rooftops, sharing this impossible joy with anyone who would listen. His daughter had spoken. After 3 years of silence, she'd found her voice. It was a miracle by any definition. But instead of celebration, Marcus felt something cold and dark creeping into his chest. Fear, not the fear that Sophie would slip back into silence, though that worry existed too. This was a different kind of fear, a more insidious one. What if someone tried to take this away? Marcus thought about Dr. Helen Morrison, the lead behavioral therapist he'd paid $180,000 over 2.5 years. She'd been so certain that Sophie's nonverbal regression was likely permanent, had filled notebooks with clinical assessments documenting the girl's lack of progress, had recommended increasingly intensive interventions that never seemed to help. Dr. Morrison had submitted her final report just 4 months ago, concluding that Emma and Sophie would likely need lifelong intensive support and that their communication skills had plateaued at a minimal level. She'd suggested Marcus begin looking into specialized residential programs for when the girls got older. Marcus had filed that report away, devastated by its conclusions but having no evidence to contradict it. Dr. Morrison was board-certified, internationally recognized in her field. Who was he to question her professional judgment? But now Sophie was speaking. Now Emma was making eye contact, showing engagement, demonstrating connection. Everything Dr. Morrison had said was impossible had happened in the span of a few weeks with Jennifer. What would Dr. Morrison say when she found out? Would she congratulate them? Or would she question the validity of Sophie's speech? Would she demand to evaluate Jennifer's methods? Would she report them to Child Protective Services for using unproven approaches? Marcus stared at Jennifer's contact information in his phone. This woman had given him everything, had given him back his daughters, had helped him honor Sarah's legacy, had shown him what it meant to truly be present with the people you love. She'd done all of this quietly without recognition while being paid minimum wage to clean his house. And he'd never told her she was more than that, never told her she was family, never gave her any official status that might protect her if someone challenged her methods or questioned her role. What if Dr. Morrison found out? What if she contacted the licensing board? What if she reported Jennifer for practicing therapy without a current license? What if she convinced Child Protective Services that Marcus was endangering his daughters by allowing unlicensed treatment? The thoughts spiraled, feeding on his fear. Marcus had learned over 3 years that the professional world didn't always celebrate miracles. Sometimes it questioned them. Sometimes it destroyed them. Sometimes credentials and protocols and institutional authority mattered more than results. He looked at the video of Sophie speaking again, her small voice so clear and full of meaning. This was real. This was progress. This was his daughter finding her way back to language and connection. But would anyone else believe it? Or would they see a desperate father being taken advantage of by someone with no credentials? Would they see Jennifer as a gift from God, as Sarah had predicted? Or would they see her as a liability, a risk, a problem to be solved? Marcus closed his laptop and sat in the dark, feeling the weight of decisions he might have to make. He could protect Jennifer by keeping this quiet, not sharing the news, not drawing attention to what was happening in his home. But that felt like a betrayal of Sophie's breakthrough, like hiding her light under a bushel. Or he could share the joy, tell the specialists who'd worked with the girls, document the progress. But that would open Jennifer up to scrutiny, potentially put her at risk, might invite exactly the kind of institutional interference he feared. From the baby monitor on his desk, he heard a small sound, Sophie shifting in her sleep, and then so quietly he almost missed it, a single word, Mama. His daughter was dreaming, and in her dreams she was speaking. Marcus put his head in his hands and tried to figure out how to protect this fragile miracle from a world that might not understand it, how to keep his family safe while honoring the extraordinary gift Jennifer had given them. He had no answers, only questions, and a growing certainty that the battle for his daughter's future was far from over. It might in fact be just beginning. 3 days after Sophie spoke her first words, Dr. Helen Morrison showed up at Marcus's door unannounced. Marcus had made a mistake born from excitement and gratitude and the inability to keep such monumental joy contained. He'd sent Dr. Morrison a brief email with an attached video of Sophie speaking, subject line simple and direct. She spoke, thought you'd want to know. He'd expected congratulations, maybe surprise, perhaps a professional request to schedule a follow-up evaluation to document the progress. He hadn't expected her to demand immediate access to his home and to Jennifer's methods. Marcus, Dr. Morrison said when he opened the door, her face stern and unsmiling. I need to observe what's happening here, today if possible. What I saw in that video raises some serious concerns. Concerns, Marcus blinked, thrown by her tone. My daughter spoke after 3 years of silence I thought you'd be happy about. I need to see the methodology firsthand, Dr. Morrison interrupted. I need to understand what approaches are being used and by whom. This is a matter of ethical responsibility. Marcus wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at him to close the door, to protect Jennifer, to keep the institutional world away from the fragile ecosystem they'd built. But 3 years of conditioning, 3 years of trusting credentials over instinct, of deferring to professional expertise, of believing that his love for his daughters wasn't enough without clinical validation, made him step aside. Of course, he heard himself say, come in. That afternoon, Dr. Morrison sat in the corner of the living room like a judge at a trial, her leather portfolio open on her lap, her pen moving in sharp, precise strokes as she took notes. Her face remained expressionless as she watched. Jennifer guided Emma and Sophie through their routine with grace and confidence, seemingly unbothered by the scrutiny. Sarah's voice played softly through the speakers. The girls moved with focus and joy, their bodies speaking the language Jennifer had helped them claim. Sophie used her new words again more. Mama singing, dance. Emma showed clear engagement, her eyes bright and present, her movements deliberate and connected. To Marcus, watching from near the doorway, it looked exactly like what it was, a miracle unfolding. Two children who'd been locked away by trauma finding their way back to life and language. Two girls connecting with their mother through movement and sound, a family healing. But Dr. Morrison saw something different. Marcus could tell by the way her mouth pressed into a thin line, the way her eyebrows drew together, the way her pen scratched more aggressively across the page. When the session ended and Jennifer began cleaning up, Dr. Morrison stood abruptly. Mr. Reynolds, I need to speak with you privately, now. They went to Marcus's home office. Dr. Morrison closed the door with deliberate care, then turned to face him with an expression of professional concern that made Marcus's stomach drop. What I just witnessed is dangerous, she said without preamble. Marcus felt like he'd been slapped. Dangerous? My daughter is speaking again. My daughters are engaged and present and happy. How is that? Unregulated methodology, Dr. Morrison cut him off, her voice sharp. Movement therapy without proper clinical oversight, without systematic data collection, without peer review or evidence-based protocols. Ms. Martinez has no active license, no professional insurance, no accountability structure. What she's doing is pseudoscience masquerading as treatment, and frankly, it's irresponsible of you to allow it. It's working, Marcus said, his jaw tightening. That's not pseudoscience, that's results. Is it? Dr. Morrison's voice dropped into a tone Marcus recognized from dozens of previous sessions, clinical, authoritative, designed to make him doubt his own perceptions. Or is Sophie simply parroting sounds? Echolalia is extremely common in autism, Marcus. What you're interpreting as meaningful communication could be nothing more than immediate repetition without comprehension. Encouraging this without proper assessment could actually cause more severe regression than what you've already experienced. The words hit Marcus like ice water. Echolalia. He'd heard the term before, read about it in the countless books and articles he'd consumed trying to understand his daughter's condition. The phenomenon of repeating heard sounds without understanding their meaning, like a parrot mimicking human speech. You're saying she's not really speaking, Marcus said slowly. You're saying the words don't mean anything. I'm saying you're gambling with your daughter's futures based on wishful thinking and the advice of someone with no credentials, Dr. Morrison said firmly. I understand you're desperate, Marcus. I understand you want to believe that 6 weeks with a housekeeper has accomplished what years of evidence-based intervention couldn't, but you need to face reality. She pulled a thick folder from her portfolio and set it on Marcus's desk. This is my clinical assessment based on 2.5 years of systematic observation and intervention. Sophie and Emma have severe communication impairments that have proven resistant to all standard treatment approaches. Their prognosis is guarded at best. What Ms. Martinez is doing, encouraging responses without proper behavioral analysis, using movement-based approaches without standardized protocols, could be actively harmful. Harmful, Marcus repeated flatly. My daughter's laughing and engaging and communicating is harmful. Unproven methods delivered by unqualified personnel are harmful, Dr. Morrison corrected. And I have an ethical obligation to report this situation to Child Protective Services if I believe children are being put at risk by inappropriate treatment. The threat landed like a bomb. Marcus stared at Dr. Morrison, understanding blooming like poison in his chest. She wasn't here out of concern for his daughters. She was here because Jennifer's success in 6 weeks had exposed the failure of everything Dr. Morrison had tried for years. This was about professional ego, about protecting her reputation, about maintaining the hierarchy that said only credentialed specialists could help children like Emma and Sophie. "You're threatening to call CPS on me," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm protecting your children from harm," Dr. Morrison said, softening her tone slightly. "Marcus, I know this is hard to hear. I know you've invested emotionally in Ms. Martinez's approach, but you've spent 3 years and significant resources pursuing evidence-based interventions. Don't throw all of that away because domestic staff made your daughters smile during a few play sessions." Marcus stood up slowly from his desk chair. Something had shifted inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. For 3 years, he'd let people like Dr. Morrison tell him what his daughters needed, what they could and couldn't do, what their future would look like. He'd paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars to apply their protocols and track their data and file their reports. And at the end of it all, his daughters had been more lost than ever. Then Jennifer had arrived, no credentials displayed on his payroll, no systematic protocols, just presence, patience, and 3 years of training she'd walked away from because she cared too much. And his daughters were actually present, actually responding, actually alive for the first time since Sarah died. "You had 3 years," Marcus said quietly. "3 years and over $2 million across all the specialists I hired. You gave me charts and assessments and carefully worded prognosis statements. You gave me data, but you never gave me hope." "Mr. Reynolds." "Jennifer gave me my daughters back in 6 weeks," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "She learned their language instead of forcing them to learn yours. She met them where they were instead of trying to drag them to where she thought they should be. She listened to what my wife tried to tell us about movement as language, and she honored it." Dr. Morrison's face hardened. "You're making a serious mistake." "Then it's mine to make," Marcus said firmly. He moved toward the office door and opened it wide. "We're done here, Dr. Morrison. Send whatever reports you need to send. File whatever complaints you feel are ethically necessary, but you're not coming back into my house. You're not evaluating my daughters again, and you're not going to intimidate me into doubting the best thing that's happened to my family in 3 years. Dr. Morrison stared at him, her professional composure cracking just slightly. She'd been used to Marcus deferring to her expertise, accepting her pronouncements, following her recommendations without question. This defiance clearly shocked her. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said coldly, gathering her portfolio. "You're right," Marcus agreed. "I don't, but I know what I'm not doing anymore. I'm not letting fear and institutional authority override what I can see with my own eyes. I'm not letting someone's need to protect their professional reputation override my daughter's well-being." Dr. Morrison walked past him without another word, her spine rigid with barely contained anger. Marcus followed her to the front door, opened it, and watched her leave without ceremony. When the door closed behind her, Marcus stood in his own foyer, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He'd just chosen an unlicensed housekeeper over a board-certified behavioral specialist. He'd just bet everything, his daughter's future, his standing with the medical community, potentially his custody if Dr. Morrison made good on her threat, on something he couldn't fully explain to anyone who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. From the living room, he heard Sophie's voice, "Daddy, come." His daughter calling him with words. Marcus walked toward the sound, toward the living room where Jennifer stood with both girls, uncertainty written across her face. She'd heard everything. The walls in his house weren't thick enough to hide raised voices. "Is everything okay?" Jennifer asked quietly, her eyes searching his face. Marcus knelt beside his daughters, Emma on one side, Sophie on the other. Both girls pressed close to him immediately, their small hands finding his. "Everything's perfect," he said. But the look in Jennifer's eyes told him she didn't believe it. The worry etched across her face said she understood exactly what his defense of her might cost him. And deep down, beneath the defiant certainty he displayed for Dr. Morrison, Marcus knew the truth. This wasn't over, Dr. Morrison wasn't done. And the battle for his daughter's future, for Jennifer's place in their family, for the right to heal in ways that didn't fit institutional protocols had only just begun. The question was whether Marcus had enough strength, enough faith, enough courage to keep fighting when the full weight of the professional world came down on them. He looked at Sophie, who smiled up at him and said quietly, "Love you, Daddy." 3 words he hadn't heard in 3 years. Yeah, he'd find the strength, whatever it took. 3 days after Dr. Morrison's visit, Marcus came home early to find Jennifer packing. He'd continued his pattern of leaving work at noon, unable to stay away from the transformation happening in his own home, drawn back by the magnetic pull of watching his daughters come alive. But this time, instead of finding Jennifer in the living room with Emma and Sophie, he heard movement from upstairs, from the guest suite where Jennifer had been staying. Marcus took the stairs two at a time, his heart already sinking before he reached her door. It stood open. Inside, Jennifer's belongings were being sorted into cardboard boxes with methodical precision. "What are you doing?" The words came out harsher than Marcus intended, roughened by the panic rising in his chest. Jennifer didn't turn around. She continued folding a sweater with careful attention, placing it in the nearest box. "I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice, Mr. Reynolds." The formal address hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't called him Mr. Reynolds in weeks, not since the night they'd watched Sarah's videos together. Not since they'd become something more than employer and employee, though Marcus had never quite figured out what to call what they'd become. "Why?" He stepped into the room, wanting to grab the boxes and throw them out the window, wanting to stop time, wanting anything except this. Jennifer finally looked at him, and her eyes were red and exhausted. "My sister runs a cleaning company in Philadelphia. She's been asking me to come work for her for months, supervisor position, better pay, benefits. I told her yes this morning." "That's not why," Marcus said flatly. "That's an excuse. What's this really about?"